Welcome back to the channel. And so today we are just going to be bench testing a starter motor before installing it back onto the vehicle. Now this starter motor I got some years ago. I kept this as a spare because I was not able to return it back to the store because I ended up getting the OEM Denso starter because I've had far too many problems with the aftermarket starters. Now, there are some aftermarket starters, they will work fairly okay, and there are some, they are straight out junk. So they'll probably work for like, I've seen some work for only a few weeks, and I've seen some go for about a year, and then they quit and they stop working, and then you will have to replace it again. And if you have an automatic transmission on your vehicle, you would have to get a tow truck and tow it either to a shop or to your home, so you're able to get a replacement starter. So my advice is, if you can, try to use the OEM or the original starter motor, and then you won't have any problems, because aftermarket ones are usually junk. Now this particular one is from a reputable rebuilder in my area, so I haven't put this down to the test yet. I still need to test it out and to see on how good the longevity is for this one. But for now, I'm just testing it on the bench and just going from there. So once again, this is a brand new starter motor that I haven't used yet. So we are just going to test it out. And this particular one, it came with a test results from the company. I will put it up on the screen shortly, and it also comes with a guarantee certificate that is just saying that it guarantees the warranty for 12 months or 20,000 kilometers. So this company had like they have a direct replacement for 1 year, but I think the parts store had like a 5 year exchange warranty of some sort. So anyhow, we are going to connect the starter now. So you can use a battery charger, or you can use a regular automotive battery from the vehicle, or somewhere else, or outside the vehicle. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have a power source, and it's 12 volts. So I'm going to turn this on after I have connected the starter. So now we are going to hook up the starter motor. So from the battery charger. So we are going to hook up the positive, which the positive cable goes. Let's just put it this way so it's easier to see, like this. And then you will be needing a ground, so you can attach the uh, the cable to the body of the starter. You can attach a negative cable to the body of the starter for the ground. And this one is just the ground for the solenoid, so you don't need to touch that. And then I'm just using a switch over here. So this can, you can buy this for cheap, for like $15 or $20 from Amazon or from your local uh, parts store or hardware store. So we are just going to connect this guy to the S terminal of the switch. So I've connected that to the S terminal of the switch. And then you have the power. You need to connect this to the power cable. This one is cheap, so it comes off easily. So we're gonna connect this to the power cable. This to the S terminal. And you have the switch over here. So this setup is going to test the entire motor. So it's going to test the solenoid and the motor itself, and it's going to test the pinion gear that pops out and retracts back when you let go of the switch. This is the same thing as if you are cranking the engine over inside your vehicle. So I set the battery charger to 200 amps engine start. And I set the timer on. I just want to turn on the battery charger. It doesn't really matter. 200 amps is more than enough. So we should be okay. So now everything is all hooked up. So I'm just going to press the switch now. And then you should be able to see the pinion gear pop out. And then when I release the switch, it should go back in and the motor should stop. So the motor is going to run, the pinion gear is going to pop out, and then for as long as I'm holding a button on the switch, and after I let go, the motor should stop and the pinion should retract back. So we're going to press the switch now. So just it pops back and forth. So everything seems to be working okay on this starter. So just for information purposes, this particular test does not necessarily mean that the starter is good. This is a no load test. It's an unloaded test because it's not simulating cranking the engine over, because the pinion gear is not attached to the flywheel if you have a manual transmission, or to the flex plate if you have an automatic transmission. So the issue is that on a no load test, a starter can work fine, but as soon as you put it in the vehicle, you will not be able to crank the engine over. It's because that when the starter is under load, it needs to draw more amperage inside the starter in order to crank the engine over. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the starter is capable of cranking the engine over. Now, years ago, in my past, when I worked for a shop, we used a bunch of aftermarket starter motors, and there were several times where it would test okay on the bench, but as soon as I reinstalled it back onto the vehicle, it would not, crank the engine over. The pinion or something in the starter motor, it would make like a whirring noise or a whining noise, as if that the pinion gear is not contacting or catching onto the flex plate or onto the flywheel, depending on if you have a manual or an automatic transmission. Now, just for experimental purposes, I have my amp clamp to test how much current it's the starter is putting out. So I'm just going to use this to have a look at the amperage. So I'm going to activate the starter now, and keep your eye on the screen. Make sure it's on DC amps if you want to test the current or the amperage. So it's running right now. It's at 61 amps, 60 amps, and dropping. And the switch just fell off now, the connector. Just a word of caution when you're doing this test. I did not use a screwdriver because I'm concerned for my own safety. So I'm not using a screwdriver, although you can use a screwdriver or a test light or something that has an insulated handle if you don't want to get electrically shocked. So you need to be careful. So I just use this switch for this particular reason. I know that starters are not supposed to be running continuously for too long, because then it's going to burn the motor out. I would recommend to not crank the starter over any more than 10 to 15 seconds, and then rest it for like a minute or two before you activate the starter, because then it's going to burn out the starter motor. So usually 10 to 15 seconds is the maximum amount of time to run the starter before you will need to stop. If you continue running the starter too long, it's going to overheat and damage the starter motor. So we're going to do this for one last time, and then that's it. So I'll just intermittently to press the button, see how much amperage it puts out. Initially, you will see a spike in amperage, and then it should stabilize after that, because the way how electricity and everything works, I'm not going to get into the detail, but there's usually a spike in amperage, so you don't need to be concerned about the spike in amperage, because then it's going to stabilize after that, because the starter motor, it needs the initial momentum in order to get the starter going. So that's why you'll see a spike in amperage, but it should stabilize. So we're at about 62 amps. Usually the longer you run it for, the amperage will drop slightly. You just see the numbers, they start to go down after you run the starter for too long, because starter motors are just supposed to be ran intermittently. It's not designed to be running all the time. This is just to crank the motor over for a few seconds, and then that's it. Now there are other tests that you can do without having the motor running. You can test the pinion And the I believe this one has like a one-way clutch or something inside the starter, so you can test that by itself. But I'm not going to be doing that today. Now I'm just experimenting this for myself too. So now I connected the switch to the copper wires to the solenoid. I connected the starter tool switch to the solenoid instead of the S terminal. And I forgot to mention that on some of the starters, it may be difficult to use a screwdriver because you may not be able to attach a screwdriver inside the S terminal on where the switch is, because sometimes there will be like a plastic piece that's covering it up. So you may not be able to use a screwdriver. So that's why I have this switch here to make things easier for testing purposes. So now this is just going to test the motor. This pinion is not going to pop out. It tests for the motor only. So we're going to observe the amperage output. It's roughly the same as if you're doing a regular test. We'll do it again for one last time. So a change of plans. I changed my mind. I'm just doing some more experiments here. I don't normally test starter motors like this all too often, but it's just some advice and some things I wanted to show you guys. So I thought, hey, that maybe this would be a good practical video. I know that sometimes you can bring your starter motors to the parts store and they'll be able to test it for free. They usually have like a professional bench testing for starters and alternators for some part stores. So you can take your starter and give it to them and they can test it on the bench. And they actually have something called a flywheel simulator. So you can be able to test the starter actually simulating cranking an engine over. So that's the good part. Now I want to conclude this video. This is going to work for a majority of vehicles for the testing purposes. It may be slightly different as to how the connections are, but it's relatively uh, the same or similar for a majority of vehicles. So that's all there is to it for testing a starter motor on the bench. Now it doesn't necessarily mean that the starter is good. You still have to test it while it's being loaded as well, unloaded and loaded. So you need to do a no load test and a loaded test. They're two completely different tests. So just because you test it on the bench and it checks out okay on the bench does not mean that it has the capability of cranking an engine over. So you need to watch out for that. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to give it a like and please consider subscribing to my channel if you're not already a subscriber, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day and take care.